Story 1. Hey there. Let me tell you about a wild encounter I had recently, a story that could give anyone a run for their money when it comes to entitled people. So, it has been a long day on the beat, and all I wanted was a hot meal and a soothing bath to wash away the stress. Little did I know that my evening was about to take a nosedive into the absurd. It was a chilly evening, and after wrapping up a grueling shift, I dragged my tired self home. The aroma of comfort food was beckoning from my phone. The convenience of ordering through an app is a lifesaver when you're too wiped out to cook or even talk to someone on the phone. I picked my favorites, hit that order button, and paid. Mission accomplished, right? Wrong. With my belly rumbling, I set up the perfect bath, bubbles and all. As the water embraced me in its warmth, I let out a sigh of relief. I deserve this, I thought. I had barely settled in when my stomach grumbled louder than a bear's growl. Ah, the food. I practically leaped out of the tub, dripping water everywhere, to make it to the door. But there was no food in sight. Some restaurants won't just wait for you to answer the door. They will leave it there and hit the doorbell and leave if you've already paid for it. The minutes ticked by, and the food didn't show. It was as if my dinner had pulled a Houdini on me. I dialed up the restaurant, trying to keep my patience in check. A voice on the other end confirmed my order and said they'd look into it. Okay, fair enough. Moments later, they call back and tell me my food had been delivered. Yeah, right. I expressed my disbelief, and the voice insisted that the delivery guy had left it right at my doorstep. They even sent me a snapshot as proof, a photo of a bag on my porch. Seriously, I was having none of that nonsense. Hold on, I said. I'll call you back. It was time to review the security camera footage. As I sat there, watching the video playback, the puzzle pieces started to fit. I saw the delivery guy stroll up, leave the bag, take a picture, and walk away. But wait, there was more. A minute later, the guy returned, sans jacket, and now wearing a hat. Sneaky little devil. He picks up the bag like he's on a secret mission and saunters off. Well, I'll be damned. I couldn't let this slide. It's not about the food anymore, it's about the principle. So, I threw on some clothes, hopped in my car, and drove straight to the restaurant. I walked in and asked for the manager, hoping to sort things out. And that's when the entitlement train really took off. The manager, a guy who acted like he invented food, didn't seem to get the gravity of the situation. I recounted my tale, throwing in a bit of detective drama for good measure. But instead of cooperation, I was met with rudeness. He dismissed my camera evidence like it was some sort of party trick and had the nerve to blame my neighborhood for being a den of thieves. I was getting seriously fed up when, out of nowhere, enters Mr. Delivery Guy. He had all the subtlety of a bull in a china shop and tried to put up a tough act. Before I knew it, he was trying to pounce on me, probably thinking I was just another annoyed customer. He even threw a chair at me, which I expertly dodged. Rookie move, pal. Now, I'm not the kind of guy to back down from a brawl, but I'm also a cop. Yeah, I am, and I have to think responsibly. So, with the situation spiraling out of control, I pulled out my badge and my gun. Shouting at them to freeze like I was in some action movie, I dialed for backup, and let me tell you, those boys arrived in record time. The cavalry had arrived, and they swiftly took the manager and the delivery dude into custody. It was about time someone read them their rights. The delivery guy's face turned paler than a ghost. He finally realized he'd messed with the wrong person. Turns out, this little escapade of his had landed him a one-way ticket to a lineup of serious charges. As the night unfolded, we learned some more juicy details. That entitled delivery man? He was the manager's brother-in-law. Talk about keeping it in the family. The manager had been covering up this food heist scheme for who knows how long, scamming people left and right. Karma finally caught up to them, and his punishment was served, hot and fresh. In the end, I might not have had my dinner that night, but I did get a taste of sweet victory. The manager got bailed out, but he lost his job, and I'll take that as a win. Stay safe out there, folks, and keep your dinner secure. Story 2. This happened to me 12 years ago. My husband and I had a whirlwind romance that lasted a year. We knew we wanted to be together after only a week, but dated for a year to be absolutely sure. My family hated him. They thought that we hadn't been together long enough to get married. They didn't like that he worked as a farm hand, and when I introduced him to my extended family, my uncle even offered to bury him in the back 40 inches for me. Not a very pleasant thing to have happened, so we decided that we would just go to the courthouse and elope. But this wouldn't be an entitled mom story if it stopped there. I began getting pressure from my mom to have an actual wedding. So when my husband and I discussed it, we figured it would be fine as long as it was very small. We didn't have much money, and neither of our families wanted to help out all that much. We settled on having a small ceremony with just the parents and siblings in a natural setting, like a woodland or park. But no, that wouldn't work for my mom. We had to have it in the backyard because it would be easier. Fine. Whatever. We picked a date for the wedding. But no, that date wouldn't suit my mom because she wanted to go to a quilt show. So again, fine. Whatever. We settled again and again, until a date was picked out by her for our wedding. I know I should have put my foot down, but my mother is very manipulative and used my father to get what she wanted every time. My father was a very kind man, and all she had to do was cry at him. He would come to me and say, "Just make your mom happy. It will make her so happy if you just do it." He would always look so exhausted, so I would do it for him, not her, to make his life easier. The wedding is still several months away, and I mentioned that since we are now having a ceremony, maybe we should have a buck and doe as well to raise money for it. For those who don't know, a buck and doe is a public party that people buy tickets for and attend to help the bride and groom raise money for their wedding. They are very fun and have games, music, dancing, and lots of adult beverages. My husband and I figured that we would have a small wedding as planned with just the immediate family, and then a big fun party for everyone else. The money raised at the buck and doe would pay for the party. My mom said absolutely not because you have to have friends for that kind of thing, and no one would want to go to your buck and doe. I was so depressed by that, I took it pretty hard and felt like an utter piece of trash. She went on to say that my extended family would never go and his family lived several hours away and would never come to anything so trivial. She just kept beating me down about it until I finally gave up trying. If you are wondering why I kept including her, I was very naive about weddings. I had no idea what I was doing, and my mother was the only person that I could ask about it. And I was hoping that maybe for once, she might put me first instead of herself, and actually do something fun with me. There was so much potential for bonding, but that wasn't to be the case. To continue, I wanted to save money on a cake, so I wanted to bake one myself and have fun with it. Nope, she had already told her alcoholic sister-in-law that she could be in charge of my cake for whatever reason. The cake for the party was pretty decent to be fair, just a simple vanilla slab cake. Nothing fancy. The aunt that made it was super insecure about it though, and accused me of not liking it. Turns out my mom said that I hated it, which I didn't of course. I wanted to get a nice dress, something I could wear again, like a sundress. She got very excited and said that she knew the perfect place to take me, and that, now I can tell all my friends that I helped pick out your dress. Oh dear Lord, no, but there was my brow-beaten father telling me to just go with her, that I didn't have to buy anything if I didn't want to. Good thing too. Now, I am not a skinny lady. I am thick as heck in all the right places, and that means finding clothing is a hard thing for me, so having a wedding dress custom made for my hourglass body was going to be expensive, so a sundress from a plus-size store is what I was going for. My mother is very skinny and looks like a Sears catalog model, so naturally she took me to a wedding dress shop that only caters to petite women. The lady in the store took one look at me when we entered the store and flat out said, "We don't carry anything in your size, and I don't know who does." I was embarrassed. I would never go to a store like that usually, and my mom thought that it was very funny and laughed at me on the ride back home, saying, "Well, what did you expect? Wedding dresses are for skinny women, so I guess you will either need to lose weight or do something else." Like what the actual heck? I told her I wanted to get a sundress. I told her to go to a plus-size store to shop with me. Instead, she took me to a petite store 4 hours away and then refused to go anywhere else. I got a dress from a kiosk in the mall a week later. I just told her it was lavender and she would have to deal with it. I was just done at that point. Depressed and self-loathing, I took over and my husband was mad at me for letting it get out of control like that. There was nothing we could do though. By that point, the wedding was a week away and we had handed my father money for the party. Potluck BBQ with surprise pizza and beer. So we just decided to throw all the cares out the window and just ride it out. Which worked way better than I had hoped. We didn't want a priest or pastor or shaman or anything else of the sort to tie the knot. Just a justice of the peace. My dad said he knew a guy and had us covered. Cool. The day before the wedding, and we are introduced to a very sketchy-looking pastor that hands us a piece of paper with the ceremony my mom has picked out for us. It had a very odd poem in the middle of it that was strange to say the least. My husband and I locked eyes and stifled laughter while listening to the inappropriate poem. My mom was elated. Now she could tell her friends that she picked the ceremony as well. The day of the wedding comes, and my husband's family shows up in the morning. His parents and 2 brothers. But my mom is nowhere to be seen. Just my dad and my brother roaming around the house. I am all dressed up in my lavender dress, and the wedding is to be at noon with a party happening for everyone else the next day. I ask my dad where she is, and he mutters quietly that she went to a quilt show and wouldn't be back until that night. A quilt show. Now many of you would have said screw it, I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway without her. But I guess the night before, she had taken the pastor aside and told him it wasn't going to be until the evening, leaving us completely in the dark. So we waited around and laughed at how absurd it all was. 6 p.m. rolls around and the pastor shows up ready for business. My mom shows up about 20 minutes later, laughing about how we can't start until she has a shower and gets dressed up. I tell her that this has been totally unacceptable, that she knew when it was supposed to be, and that she purposely decided to disrespect not only myself and my husband, but also his family as well. She said that I was being ungrateful. We all stood in silence until she came out, and I looked at her and said, "Are we allowed to start now? Do you need a snack? Did you go to the bathroom first?" I would normally never be rude like that, but I was just done. She looked embarrassed and fake smiled and said it was fine. The man went on with the ceremony, and when he got to his odd poem, just as we had predicted, all the brothers lost it. We all laughed hysterically. My mother was pissed and hissed at us to all stop laughing, but we couldn't. It was the best thing. My dad and husband's parents were roaring with laughter. After the wedding was done, she went to sulk in her room. How dare we have fun? The party the next day was a blast. We did everything we could think of to have fun despite my mother constantly trying to get me to hide away from the party. She was literally trying to get me to clean the house and do dishes while the party was going on so that she could mingle and drink. At one point, I just laughed and said no, shotgunned a tall boy of Busch Light in front of her with my husband's cousin, and suggested that we all have a big bonfire to send off the night. Mom huffed and took my dad in the house to yell at him about it. My poor dad. My mom resurfaced after a while and sat at the fire. She smiled at me and proceeded to start telling embarrassing stories about my childhood. The kind you don't tell people that you aren't too familiar with, the traumatic kind. My husband and I were quite tipsy by that point and decided that since most of the family was either leaving or going to bed, we would round up the stragglers and see if they wanted to go to the local bar. Everyone was tired, so my husband and I walked to the bar all done up in our wedding duds in true rural small-town class. We had redressed in our wedding clothes for the party because why not? It was awesome. My mom got control of what was left of the party, and we got to tell the town about our marriage. I met old school teachers, classmates, and even the former town mayor. We didn't need to pay for drinks for the rest of the night and played darts and pool with everyone there. When we got back at 3 a.m., we cleaned everything up from the party and started up the campfire again to cook breakfast. We got to hear about how cringy my mom was after we left and how my husband's aunt told her off on her way to bed. That whole series of events led to me fully coming to the realization that my entitled mother would never change. She would always disrespect me. After 10 years of no contact soon after my wedding, we finally started talking again. This time, I set the boundaries, and there isn't a thing she can do about it. Moral of the story: do what you want for your special day. If someone doesn't like it, it's not your problem. Just because a person is family doesn't give them the right to treat you badly. Story 3. It was just another ordinary day, or at least that's what I thought. I woke up early, got dressed, and headed to my favorite coffee shop, like I do every morning. I was looking forward to my morning cup of coffee and a good book. But little did I know, this day would turn out to be anything but ordinary. I have spina bifida, a condition that I've had since birth. But it's never held me back. I've always been determined to live my life on my own terms, to not let my condition define me. I have a great job, a loving family, and a wonderful group of friends who support me in every way. So, when I woke up that day, I had no idea that I was about to face an obstacle that would put my strength and determination to the test. As I wheeled myself up to the counter and waited patiently in line for my turn to order. As I waited, a woman Karen walked in and immediately cut in front of me, literally pushing my wheelchair out of the way without so much as a word or an apology. She literally pushed out of the line and took my place. I was taken aback by Karen's rudeness, but I decided not to let it get to me. I smiled and said politely, "Excuse me, but I was next in line." Karen turned to me and sneered, "I don't have time for this. I need my coffee now." I, who was not one to back down, decided to speak up. "You know what? I don't have time for entitled people like you. You may have pushed me out of the line, but you won't push me around." Karen, who was taken aback by my assertiveness, tried to dismiss me by saying, "Oh please, you're just a cripple in a wheelchair. Who are you to talk to me like that?" I, who was not going to let Karen's words affect me, replied with a calm and strong voice, "I may have spina bifida, but that does not make me any less of a person than you are. I have worked hard to be where I am today, and I will not let someone like you take that away from me. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a coffee to order." The commotion in the coffee shop had not gone unnoticed by the cafe manager, who rushed out to see what was going on. He saw Karen pushing me out of the line and immediately stepped in, telling Karen off for her behavior. But Karen refused to leave, despite being denied service. Just then, the manager noticed his friend sitting at one of the tables, sipping his coffee. He was an off-duty police officer, and the manager knew he could count on him for help. He signed to his friend, who quickly understood the situation and stepped in, telling Karen she needed to leave the coffee shop right away or face the consequences. But before the officer could take action, I spoke up. "Please, I would like to press charges against her for physically pushing me out of the line earlier." The officer then prevented Karen from leaving and called for backup. He then took Karen in for questioning and later arrested her for physically assaulting me. From that day on, I, who had always been a strong and independent woman, became an even stronger advocate for people with disabilities, standing up for their rights and making sure that they were treated with the respect and dignity they deserved. And the coffee shop manager, who had always been a supporter of me, made sure that the coffee shop was a safe and inclusive space for all customers. Story 4. I was hired for a retail store in January of last year. The store is pretty famous for its security department, and my job as an electronics specialist was to work in close conjunction with them to prevent theft. The uniformed guard and I were buddies. We went to the same college, and all in all working there was pretty chill. I managed to establish myself as a hard worker, and I eventually got promoted to being the lead for my department. Enter dumbass delinquent. Dad was a new hire at the same time as me. He wasn't just your average idiot. I truly do think his family must have had a special history of stupid to produce him, but it's not something that I'll ponder too hard. He constantly arrived late, stood around on his phone, point blank refused to answer the store phone, and my final straw with him was that he would forget to lock cabinets up after he restocked. I approached him and told him that he couldn't forget that anymore, and I had hoped that would be the end of things, but I was so wrong. He started doing it on purpose. Now let me break away for a second. Part of why I worked so closely with the security team when I started was because whoever had designed our store was a crackhead. At least 3 of the aisles in my department were blocked from security cams, and a couple display cases didn't actually lock right if you weren't careful. We submitted request after request, but our store was due for a remodel in 3 months, and corporate was kind of hoping the problem wouldn't be too severe. It was. I needed someone at the desk at all times to make sure customers were satisfied, but I also needed someone roaming those aisles due to lack of cam footage. It just so happened that Dad was more than happy to fill in. About a week after Dad and I's coaching session about remembering how to close a door and lock it, our security team reported we had some iPads missing from our stockroom. It was a big deal, about $2,200 worth. But the cameras in the back caught nothing, and I counted the ones on the floor. We were square. My security friend asked me to keep an eye on that aisle in particular. It was one with no camera, and I promised to help him out. 2 days later, another 3 were gone, and a PS4. Our head of security flipped his lid. He pulled me aside and basically laid into me. My job as a lead was to be responsible for my department, which made me responsible for $3,400 worth of missing items. I told him that I was watching the department with Dad like a hawk, and that he had to pick between that and putting someone as a monitor for our stockroom. His response: if Dad could watch for thieves better than I could, maybe he should be the department lead. I was astounded and angry to say the least, but with $3,400 of theft on my record and nothing on his, Dad became the lead. It was obvious that he had no idea what he was doing. I basically ran the department by reminding him to sign off on vacation pay, days off, scheduling errors, and direct my coworkers while he still sat on his phone. But he was the golden employee who hadn't let someone steal 4 iPads, so my complaints went nowhere. About a week or so after the iPad event and my demotion, I walked down an aisle and noticed something strange. A display case was firmly closed, but the lock was undone. I knew Dad was up to his nonsense again, but he was my manager now, so I just sucked it up and locked it. I went down the next aisle and stopped cold. 3 more cases had the exact same problem. I locked them up and finished my shift without mentioning it to Dad. I had some petty revenge in mind. My thought process: if I could record Dad leaving something unlocked, I could get my job title back and pin the theft of the iPads on his irresponsible shoulders. At the time I thought it was an excellent plan, but dear reader, I wasn't thinking big enough. My next shift I set up my phone at the very end of the aisle, hidden in between 2 display TVs. It blended in nicely, and I let it record for about an hour before I checked the footage and deleted it if there was nothing. Storage was an issue. I caught Dad walking down the aisle restocking things, and then shutting the cabinet but not locking it. Voila! I had him by the balls now. Something prompted me to keep watching the video. What came next made my day and week. Dad had a friend who stopped by regularly. The 2 basically spent the better part of his shift talking. However, anytime a manager stopped by, it always looked like Dad was helping a friendly customer. It pissed me off, but I had my hands tied until I watched the video. Dad's friend walked down the aisle about 4-5 minutes later and slid open the door and took out whatever he pleased. That particular day he nabbed a laptop and an iPod Touch. The 2 were careful enough to not take too much at once and not hit every display. About 30 minutes later, Dad would come to restock the cabinet with whatever his buddy had stolen and lock it up, making it seem like someone was stealing from our stockroom, since the floor counts were right. I had obviously stumbled into their plan before and messed it up without realizing. I brought my phone down to security and showed them the video of Dad leaving the locks undone, and then his friend window shoplifting. We hatched a plan. My security buddy called Dad down to the camera room and told him that we had found the iPad thief. Dad looked kind of pale, but to his credit smiled and asked who had caught him. I told him it was me, and that we were going to go upstairs and apprehend him now, but that I felt like he should be there since he was the department lead. Dad turned a tad green and led the way upstairs. We reached his friend, who security promptly detained to be arrested by the PD, and Dad looked simultaneously sick and relieved. I clapped him on the back and told him how excited I was that the thief was caught and my conscience could rest easy. Then security arrested him for aiding and abetting. The pro-revenge, Dad and Co. had sold the iPads and PS4 online to some idiot kids on Craigslist. Because we couldn't recover them, we took the lost sales out of his last wages and bank account, which incidentally ended up being almost exactly how much he made since he started. Keep in mind, he got a pay bump from my job title. In addition, I got a nice little bonus to the tune of $3,400 for catching them, as well as my job as lead back. And because the idiot was tried for grand larceny, he went all the way to the state courthouse, where I was waiting for him, filming his entrance to the courthouse with a nice, new, shiny iPad. Story 5. Well, good morning/afternoon/evening. I'm a writer and photographer where I like to visit abandoned places and urban life. I own TikTok and it where I post about my travels, and I'm a marijuana user. I feel that marijuana makes me more creative, and so I tend to eventually use it to write, study about my current field, study for college, I'm trying to be a doctor, and to photograph places from a different perspective. In this case, I only go to the ones I've visited before. But I understand that some people may not like marijuana because of prejudice or for another reason. One of the neighbors doesn't care and smokes too. Another doesn't care. But the upstairs neighbor, precisely where I smoke from the joint out the window, so as not to disturb others in the hallway, said he wouldn't like me to use marijuana at home. Again, through the conversation, I tried to understand the situation. He has nothing against those who use it, and he found my responsibility to notify the neighbors about my habits admirable, but he has serious problems with allergies to smells, being that his house has hospital smell, as they only use neutral disinfectants, and that marijuana sometimes triggers it. So I started to only smoke bong at home, which smells less. When he's not home, I watch his car leave, and then I keep a good relationship with the neighborhood. So after this introduction, I can get to Karen. On the day in question, my neighbor was home, and I didn't have my bong. My cat broke it, and I was researching places to visit and studying photography. So to smoke a joint, I went down from the building and went to a public square next to my house. I sat down, took my notebook, and lit a small joint. When I noticed out of the corner of my eyes an angry Karen coming towards me, she said to me, "What is that, you bum?" I replied, "I'm smoking. Are you flustered with that?" She answered, "Of course. Can't you see that you're poisoning the air of the entire square? This square is 1 hectare, and I was just in a very wooded place with no one around." So I said, "I'm sorry, I'm going to put it out, and I'm going to look for a better place to smoke." "What's your problem with weed, though?" She answered, "My problem is you guys who let people wander around." I realized that she was going to start a prejudice conversation that I honestly wasn't in the mood to refute, so I got up from the bench and walked away. She shouted, "What are you doing?" I replied, "Since I was disturbing you, I will smoke somewhere else." She comes up to me and takes the already extinguished joint from my hand and says, "No, now you're going to wait for the police. I already called." I had nothing else with me. I left with just the cigarette I was going to use. So I took the most unexpected step and sat down on the bench. She asked, "Did you decide to wait?" I replied, "Yeah." Karen furrowed her face, as if she sensed some nonsense was going to happen after all. The other guys she freaks out must leave without paying to see. Then, still cursing me, she called the police, which is surprising since she said she already called them. Then a few minutes later a policeman arrived. He looked at Karen cursing me and already made a face of disappointment. I had already experienced problems with the police before, and I knew that it was enough to say that I am a user, give a justification for smoking on the street, and report the small amount that the maximum they would ask was for me to sign a term stating that I knew that he was on drugs, and that this is illegal, but for non-prison users, and to avoid getting a record they recommend a voluntary donation of a basic food basket, which I already did considering that I help myself without having a dirty name. I helped the policeman who did his job to stop me, and I help a family that is hungry. Then the policeman arrives and says, "What is happening now, Karen?" Then I realized that he probably already knew her. She answered, "This pot is marginalizing this square where I want to pass." He asks me, "Do you have marijuana?" I answered, "No," which was true since my only joint had been captured by Karen. Then she says, "And this one?" showing the joint in her hand. So I answer, "It's with you, so it's probably yours." The policeman chuckles and says, "Karen, I didn't know you smoked. We'll need to arrest you for that." Karen is in shock and says, "No, but it's his, I swear." The policeman says, "Lucky for you, this amount is not a crime in Brazil." Karen is relieved that she doesn't know the basics of her own country's laws and hands over the joint and leaves. After talking to the policeman, I explained my situation and that it wasn't an affront to go smoking in the square. I just wanted to respect my neighbor's allergy. He understood my point, and we discussed the legalization where he was in favor, but without speaking because he was on duty, and he only ordered me to avoid smoking in the street, because this is theoretically a crime, and if he observed it, he would be obliged by law to intervene. He too explained that Karen keeps calling the police for absolutely everything, from skateboarders riding the rink or teenagers wanting to ride a swing. Everything for her is a criminal offense, and so my excuse of the marijuana being hers would probably reduce the calls they are forced to answer, but knowing it was a nonsense. Eventually I pass by this policeman, and until I say hello, he always asks, "You don't have anything, do you?" And I always say no. In the end, as I said, she wouldn't be arrested, but the panic she felt was pretty funny. I know that what I do is illegal, but I always try to do it in a way that guarantees my individual freedom without disturbing anyone's life. Edit. 1. Thanks to everyone who gave me any tips. I really appreciate it. 2. I understand the buzz about wanting to be a doctor, and I have some facts about it. Asterisk, I try to be as respectable as possible. I know I can't get stoned to study medicine and/or when I go to work professionally as a photographer. It is not feasible to use any substance when working on something that affects the lives of others, whether opening a person or taking pictures of an apartment to be sold. Asterisk, it is remarkable the existence of mental problems in overworked doctors, which leads them to be alcoholics or users of self-prescribed prescription drugs. You shouldn't be concerned about a joint smoked by a student outside of your work, but about the mental health of an entire class who are always ready to help you. I already had the nightmare of having a depressed doctor.